Hello, my name is Autumn Brown, and I'm a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism and Education in the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, January 13th, 2020, I am meeting with Joyce Jackson to discuss her experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Ms. Jackson, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let's begin by telling me about yourself. Like, where were you born, and a little bit about your family.
I was born in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and never remembered staying there because I think we moved to Oklahoma City right after that. From there, I went to school in the Oklahoma City area, except for the period of time that I attended school at Dungy, which was in the Spencer area, for a couple of years. And during that period of time, my teacher was Clara Luper. As far as my family is concerned, my baby sister ended up being the first Miss Black Oklahoma. So we've been involved with Miss Luper and the things that she was involved in the community probably for years, our entire family. I was raised by my stepfather and my mother, and I had a brother and two sisters. That's basically about my family.
What was your sister's name?
My sister was named Melva Walker. She was the one that became the first Miss Black Oklahoma. She was attending Langston at the time. And she got involved in a lot of wonderful things as a result of having participated in the Miss Black Oklahoma because of Miss Luper.
Cool. You mentioned Dungy. That's where my dad went to school.
Oh, okay.
And he talks about that all the time. What was the community like when you were growing up? Can you describe it?
Well, like I said, we moved we lived in Oklahoma City, and then we moved to the Dungy area. And then we lived in Oklahoma City in Crescent Hills. And that's where I went to Douglas. I finished at Douglas High School. And it was very close. It was, I felt the community was very close. Now that I say that, it was. Everybody helped everybody else. And it was the period of time before integration here in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma. I had attended, because my real father lived in Oakland, California, and my grandmother lived in Fresno. Every couple of years, my daddy would send for my sister Johnny, and I to come to California because he missed us. And so my education is really between Oklahoma and California a lot, back and forth. And as a result of that, it was so different here because everything was still segregated. And when I went to California, that was when I sit in classes with Hispanic, Asians, everyone. And so it was entirely a different dynamic than coming back home. But I so much enjoyed being at places like Dungy. It was just a sense of community. And the same thing with Douglas, going the high school, the bands, the music, the interaction. When I attended Dungy, they were pushing to be number one in everything. But when I attended Douglas, we were number one in everything. Best football team, best basketball team, best choir in the state, best band in the state, everything. So my growing up was unlike a lot of people when they say things like that it was fearful or stressful. I never encountered that. I never encountered a sense of fear about the segregation until I think I didn't realize the difference and had no sense of fear about being Black. But I knew there were a lot of places we couldn't attend. I knew there in high school we couldn't go to Spring Lake Park, which is now the Metro Center. We couldn't for a long time. When things are as they are, that's what you grow into, and you don't realize that there are other ways until people open those doors for you, and then you go, whoa, you know. So going downtown, my mother and grandmother always went downtown for us because for a long time we weren't allowed to go and try on clothes in the downtown area. Yeah.
So what was it like going to California where there was more integration, seemingly, and then coming back to Oklahoma where it was segregated? Like you mentioned, you don't really know what you don't know.
What you don't know.
Yeah, so what was that like going and seeing that and then coming back here and seeing how different it was?
Well, like I said, it became an eye opener, but it was probably more fearful going into a class with people of all different races and cultures and ethnicities than being here. And that's when you go, oh, okay. They spoke all kinds of languages. And so just to interact with people of different cultures that shared their culture with you, you know. I remember a kid saying to me something about, did I drink coffee? And I said, do I drink coffee? No, my grandmother drinks coffee. And he said, well, I thought that's how you got Black, because you drink coffee. And I thought, that's crazy. But of course, it was because of his lack of interaction also, you know. And so when I returned home, then it kind of opened up your eyes to the fact that these are places you hadn't been able to go in Oklahoma. But in California, you were able to intermingle with people of all races, you know. I guess that's why people even today think California is much more liberal than any other state in the nation. So I guess it is.
I guess so. So you talked about what schools you attended during what years. What years were you in school? Like what year did you graduate high school?
I graduated from Douglas High School in 1962. And we had one of the largest classes to graduate. We had over 300 students to graduate in our class. And I was a part of Miss Luper's classes 57 and 58. I was there. But of course, I joined the NAACP Youth Council, and Miss Luper taught history and social studies when I was in school out there. But of course, Miss Luper taught everything because she wanted us to always be prepared for anything and everything. And so people have no idea the things that she was. That's when I think that was when I realized how much I liked history. I remember students saying, oh, they don't like history. But Miss Luper taught history where you felt like you really knew those people. Like they did things that were visible, you know. And so
What do
just
you
an
mean by that?
appreciation.
What do you mean by that? Like they did things that were visible?
Well, when she would talk about the things like Booker T. Washington or anything like Du Bois, she would talk about the difference that they had made, and so they became so familiar to us from her teaching us about them that they were like people that you felt like you knew, even though they weren't in our neighborhood, but you felt like you knew them because of all of the things that they brought forth, you know. So like Booker T. Washington, of course, with the education, Du Bois because of the NAACP and because they became real things. And so that's when I think I gained a respect for history and knowing our history.
Okay.
And how important our history was. Yeah.
So we're going to talk a lot more about Clara Luper and her teachings, for sure. But can you tell me about some of your other teachers? Like, did you have any other teachers that stood out and had similar impact as Miss Luper?
Yes, there was a teacher at Douglas High School that we really didn't have Black history books. And there was a teacher at Douglas that taught band. His name was Mr. Buford. I think it was Willie Buford. Anyway, Mr. Buford taught band, and I tell people all the time that he was into rap way before rap was ever invented, because he realized that kids like music so much that to teach us about a certain person in history, he would start a beat, and we would hum to the beat. And so sometimes if you pass Mr. Buford's class when he was giving a test, you'd find kids going, because that helped them to remember what he taught us about Black history. And so he was one of the teachers. I had quite a few teachers probably at Douglas that made an impact. My favorite was Miss Wiley. Miss Wiley was an English teacher, but she opened up the world to us regarding Shakespeare, and she put it in real context. So we would understand what was going on during that period of time and what the words meant. And so Miss Wiley was one of those teachers that wanted the boys to have their shirts tucked in and for young ladies to act like young ladies and not be boisterous and getting into fights. And she was all about etiquette and all about helping us to learn and to be able to present ourselves. You know, but that was just a follow-up from some of the things that Ms. Luper instilled in us. And you knew the teachers cared about you. You knew the teachers knew your family. My mother knew all the teachers. And so if I got in trouble, of course, the teachers would call my mother and or come to the house. So the teachers cared quite a bit about you. There was quite a few teachers there at Douglas, but I would say Mr. Buford and Miss Wiley. And then, of course, there was Mr. Hicks, who taught music and taught us to sing, and we won lots of choir competitions. But I remember Mr. Hicks telling me that I could sing if I would ever stop talking and giggling in class. And when I ended up later on in the television business, he called me to speak to one of his classes, and he said, "I knew you were going to do something big." But yeah, so I enjoyed going to school at Douglas because we had a lot of teachers that invested a lot into us and cared about us. And I can just remember the things that stood out. And of course, like I said, we had the best of everything, the best football team and band. And when the band used to be in the parades here in the city, it would give you goose pimples to see them march down the street. I mean, the whole community would come out because of that Douglas pride, you know, the pride of the East Side, the pride of the East Side. And so, yeah.
I've heard so much about Douglas's band and the parades.
Yes.
And it was like which shut streets down, I hear.
Mm-hmm.
That it was a big deal.
Oh, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And when our drum major would lean back and he'd step off, the whole crowd would just go crazy, and we would follow them all the way downtown where they would finish the march.
One thing you said was we had the best of everything. So with Brown 54, the talk was that schools were underfunded, lack of resources, that you guys, in fact, didn't have the best of everything.
No, we didn't. And you know, it's when you don't know. It's like someone telling you that you grew up poor, which we did. I didn't know I was poor though. Because if the neighborhoods and everybody else is in the same situation, no, we didn't have new books. We didn't have probably a lot of the equipment and things that everybody else had. But we didn't know that we didn't have, that we were lacking in a lot of things, material things. So,
do you think that lack of material things impacted your education?
yes, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. When you talk about not having the books, having leftover books. But that's what we had become used to. But yes, but our teachers made an effort to make sure that wherever we didn't have the equipment or material, they would make do with what we had and make it seem as if we had the same things that other people had. You know,
it almost seems like teachers were like the parents. Like
they were.
The parents know you're poor, but
That's
the kids don't know you're poor, and they shield the kids from.
Yes. And our teachers would always, if we wanted to go somewhere, like Miss Luper would do fundraisers for everything, and so that's what our teachers did. If we needed something really, if we really needed something. The community would come together with the teachers and they would do fundraising. But yeah, we didn't realize that we were lacking. But you're right, we did not have the same equipment. We did not have the funding. And of course, our teachers definitely weren't paid a decent wage. But as far as our education, our teachers put a lot of work into making sure that we could compete with the rest of the world. Yes.
How old were you when you became aware of civil rights activism happening in your community?
I was 13. Yeah, I was 13 when Ms. Luper started talking about the rights that we didn't have. And got involved in the march after, I got involved when I was 14, more so, but we became aware when I was 13.
And how did that make you feel, like when you became aware of the rights that you didn't have as a student, 13-year-old student? what were the tensions? Like, what was going on?
The tensions to me were more about how my parents were treated. I remember my mother working in homes, cleaning houses, and it became really hard for me to. It still kind of makes me cry. When my mother had to go to someone's home and clean their homes, when mother would take me with her on the weekends if she had to go out. And I didn't like the fact that even though I needed clothes, I didn't like the fact that we received the hand-me-down clothes from those people. And I can't say that they were that they treated us poorly, because they didn't. They treated us great. I just didn't like the fact that my mother had to work in their homes, cleaning house. And then my mother decided to go back to school. And when I graduated from Douglas High School, my mother graduated from LPN nursing school and got her license. And she no longer worked in anyone's kitchen, but we graduated right a couple of months apart. And I was so proud of her that she had decided to go back and get some education to do something. And she became ultimately an excellent nurse. She worked for St. Anthony's. But those were the things that when you can't go to places because of the color of your skin, that wears on you. Yeah, yeah. And like I said, when I came back from California, that's when it really impacted what Miss Luper had been talking about, you know.
And how old were you when you came back from California?
Well, like I said, back and forth,
okay.
back and forth. But I came like 2 years with Miss Luper. When I came back, we moved to the city. I went to Webster for one year. Then I started at Douglas in the 10th grade, and I was at Douglas 10th, 11th, and 12th, like that. But before that, it was back and forth. Yeah.
So can you kind of describe, you've talked about you couldn't go into restaurants or shops because of the color of your skin, but more than that, like, can you talk a little bit more about like the economic climate during this time? So in an interview with Clara Luper that I found, I came across. In my head, when I think about segregation, I think about like shops and school, but I don't think about hospitals and like places like that. And in this interview, she talks about her brother who was really sick and taking him to Henrietta. They wouldn't even look at him because he was Black. And he ended up passing later on that day. And that kind of hit, because I think we think about segregation very surface level. But so can you kind of talk about like taking it below surface level? Like, what was it like? And also the reason why I ask is there's such segregation nostalgia almost with people who are like, well, we desegregated and we lost all of our teachers and we lost our community and our culture. So in order to kind of combat that,
because we never integrated. That's the point that I think people don't realize. There has never been a full integration. We desegregated is what we did. And in the process of desegregating, we did lose our sense of community. We lost all of the Black-owned businesses because people started thinking, okay, I can go across town and shop for better groceries, better prices, because in our community, the prices were higher because they bought smaller amounts because of the economy, because they couldn't afford to get it in bulk, those kinds of things. It did. People start moving once the desegregation set in, like I said, we lost our Black-owned businesses, and people started wanting to go to other places, going to movies that we hadn't ever been allowed to go to before. Because when I was growing up, we went to the Jewel Theater and we went to the Aldrich. And the Aldrich was where they had the talent show. And so on 2nd and 4th Street was where a lot of Black-owned businesses were here in Oklahoma City. And those began to die out because of lack of business. People thinking that they're getting something better if they now they're allowed to go to those places. So yes, we lost our sense of community. And as far as going to a hospital, of course, I don't remember ever being sick to go to a hospital until after the desegregation. But I'm sure that my mother could only work in certain parts when she first started, because there's always that unspoken, and it's still in certain areas, But yes, it ruined our economy when it came to our community making money, and our families started trying to purchase homes past the line and moving out of the neighborhood. So we lost a lot of support. And it did have a major impact on our business, and it still does today, because people still tend, well, there is a flourishing today of young entrepreneurs, and so that's kind of putting a little more into our communities, but we have lost. That's why you see communities that look like there's the businesses have all gone out of businesses, the places, the homes, they can't afford the homes. So a lot of that stuff impacted our community for such a long period of time. We're still trying to catch up. Even today, they're still trying to salvage today some of the historical buildings, some of the things that were done, because we were such a tight community when we were in survival mode. And then desegregation, I don't think it necessarily lifted us up. It moved us out. Yeah.
Can I just say, like, I started this program in 2015, and I would go to class very much being the only Black person in class, right? And so we would talk about, like, my program is very much like, it's social foundations and education, so very much like race, class, sex, education, all these things that impact education. People would look at me crazy in my classes when I would come out and say, I think forced desegregation completely ruined the advancement of Black people.
It did.
And people are like looking at me crazy, and I'm just like, I just feel like it did, because it was a way for them to like force us out, and then people started leaving, and not to say that like we want to go back to when you can't go where we want to go, but having that strong sense of community, Black businesses, and it almost seems like a Black Wall Street. Like, we had our community.
It was. And
the dollars are circulating in our community, and then it was out. So people would look at me crazy when I would say these things.
Right.
But hearing it from more than one person who actually experienced it and lived it, it's just like, I'm not crazy.
No, it really changed so many things. I would say every area, probably across the country, felt the same kind of movement away from the community because of the desegregation. Of course, it did offer us more opportunities. It did offer us an opportunity to be involved in higher learning, to be involved in the medical world, the science world, all of the different things that the world has to offer. But it did destroy our sense of community. Matter of fact, youngsters today don't realize or respect their history because they don't know it. So, yeah.
And the fact that they're not that far removed from it.
No.
I mean, my dad was in segregated schools. One generation from Jim Crow.
Absolutely.
And so,
absolutely. And it impacted lots of things that I was involved in. I mean, when I went to work for Channel 5, which was in 1970, I was a 60s child. And so I had a big afro because of the influence of having been, I was in Oakland, California. When I graduated from Douglas, I went to Oakland because my father wanted me to go to college there. And I ultimately became involved in the beginnings of the Black Panthers because my neighbor was Bobby Seale. So that had an influence on that sense of pride about who you are.
Yeah.
Because that's what they taught, is respect for your own history and your own culture and what you can do to help your fellow man or fellow woman, because my daddy was in the service with Bobby's father. And when I moved out to California, then my father wanted Bobby to walk me with me to college, which was a junior college. It was the Merritt campus, which was right about probably 3-4 blocks. But because I was from Oklahoma, my father was afraid. He didn't want anybody messing with his daughter. And so Bobby's assignment was to watch out for me because Bobby was attending the school, and ultimately Huey Newton attended the school. And so I got involved in that, raised my level of Black pride, raised my level of awareness, raised my level of respect for each other in the community. Miss Luper had already instilled those things, but it moved to a different level once I moved to California. And so once James Brown and other folks said Black was beautiful and I'm Black and I'm proud, I had probably one of the first afros here in Oklahoma, because when I came back home, there was a gentleman on Northeast 23rd that started the Soul Boutique, and I went to work for him, and I became his manager, and he gave me my first afro, which was a small afro. When I was hired at Channel 5, my afro was this big. And so my boss was the gentleman that hired me, became my boss, and ultimately my mentor. He was wonderful to me because he put me on television 6 months after I started there. He hired me, and I wasn't at Channel 5, but probably a couple of days, when the president of the station asked me to come to his office. And so I went to his office, and he said to me, that's when you realize that segregation was still embedded in a lot of folks' mind. He said, first, I want you to know that we're glad you came to work for Channel 5. And of course, there was only one other Black there when I started, and that was the janitor. And the janitor was a minister. He ultimately became the minister who married my husband and I. But it was the president of the station said, "I'm glad you're here, and we're really excited about working with you. But I think I need to tell you that you need to change your hair because your hairstyle would offend people and they think you might be too militant." And so I thought, I said, well, first thing, I had a job. I was working at OIC, and I can always get my job back. And the second thing is, I'm not cutting my hair or changing my hair for anybody. And what does my hair have to do with my mind? And so he sat there and I sat there, and it seemed like an eternity, but I'm sure it was probably just a moment. And he said, "Okay, Miss Jackson, welcome to Channel 5. And that was the end of it. I left his office, went right to the guy that hired me, and I said, if he talks to me about my hair again, I'm leaving you. And he said, "Oh, Joyce, it'll never happen again." You know?
And did it?
No. I'm sure the staff whispered, folks, but they never said it to me. I did have run-ins with people that came to the station because they assumed that I was a janitor. And when I first started, I was the receptionist. I was a gopher. I was hired to be the receptionist part-time, and my boss's administrative assistant, and to give tours. And like I said, I was only out there probably 6 months, and my boss called me in and said, "We're going to put you on the air." You know, and so he said, "I'm going to teach you." Because he asked me had I finished college, and I had dropped out. And I said, "No." And he said, "That's okay." And he was the one that encouraged me to go back to school. I went back to school and got my degree in broadcast journalism. But just to show you, my run-ins were with clients that came to the stations where they wanted me to run errands for them. And I said, "I'm not the errand girl." I said, "I work out here, but I'm not the errand girl."
Right.
And so I did have some come to Jesus talks with some people. So those things impacted, all throughout your career.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I bet it was scary. Well, in my head, was it scary meeting the president and him saying, "Cut your hair"? Did you have any inkling of I could lose my job?
No. I was so confident at that point, having left Oakland, because I left Oakland just before they had the big, no, it was after, when they had the big to-do at the University of California. And several of the Panther members went down to the state capitol and carried guns and talked about our rights.
I remember that.
Yes, and that was when my father, when it hit the newspaper and everything, and my father said, "Oh, I didn't expect Bobby and Huey to get you involved in anything that you could get killed, And so that's when my father said, "I'm sending you back to Oakland." So I came back home, and that's when I got involved again with Miss Luper with the sanitation strike. So all of those things.
Wow, he's out too much.
Right, too much.
Okay, let's see. So we talked about your experiences in segregated schools. You graduated before Oklahoma's plan kind of rolled out to desegregate schools. Mm-hmm. So even though Brown had passed in 54, you graduated 8 years after Brown.
Right.
Had Oklahoma at that point at least had a plan, or was it still nothing even up until the time you graduated?
No, it was really nothing of significance until after I graduated, but my son was impacted by the finger plan that they started here busing. And I got into it with some people at Channel 5 because I could hear them whispering about, oh, this is going to really be a mess. And I don't know if I need to take my kid out of school. And so I got into it because I said, now what makes you think that that I'm so excited about having my child next to your child being bussed out of my community?
Into yours.
Yeah, right, right. And what makes you think that I have any different feelings, than you have about this whole situation? Um, I wanted my child to have the very best, but at the same time, I was really upset that they would have the nerve to think that just because my child is going to be sitting next to your child, that I'm just all thrilled about my child having to catch a bus to go across town, you know. So, but we got past that. I mean, he went and he had a good experience, but a lot of the kids didn't.
And where was he bused to?
He was bused to South. I can't remember the name of the school.
U.S. Grant.
Yeah, one of those schools.
Capitol Hill.
He ultimately graduated from Northwest Classic, but I can't remember the name of the school that they bused him to when it first started. But yeah, so he was involved in that.
Okay. Let's see. So you mentioned having Clara Luper as a teacher, but did you happen to have anyone like Nancy Randolph Davis, Ada Lois Scipio, or Thelma Parks as a teacher?
No, I worked with Ms. Parks in the community in a lot of community activities. Ada Lois Scipio, I interviewed her when I was in the television business, and people like Ada Lois Scipio and Miss Nancy Davis. Of course, I know her daughter, and she was very involved with Miss Luper in all of the sit-ins and things. So I knew her as part of the NAACP Youth Council, that she was always there and the things that she stood for. And they were always teaching us, always. I mean, when we were at school, and then when we were attending the youth council, we were always learning different things about civil rights, different things about the Constitution, different things about our rights and community and what we should do to help people. And that was, like throughout the whole period of time that I was involved with anything that Ms. Luper did, And Ms. Luper did so many things. I mean, besides the Miss Black Oklahoma and the sanitation march, the sit-in, I wasn't a part of the original 13. I was a part of the continuous group, and there were quite a few of us. Matter of fact, there's still not a list of all the people that participated, because people participated for years, because this was the longest nonviolent sit-in movement in the nation. 6 years until the Civil Rights Bill was passed.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before we go into your experiences with the sit-ins, can you talk a little bit like what your experiences were like with Thelma Parks or Nancy Davis or Ada Lois Scipio, just so I can have some like information about these women? Or do you have any like experiences that stand out about any of these women, or?
Well, like I said, with Ms. Parks, I probably interacted with her more after I was grown, and of course I interviewed her and went to her school for different things to interview for the news department. But working with her, she was one of those people that knew exactly what she wanted and the way she wanted it done. There was no hesitation about her in making decisions about what needed to be done. As far as Ada Lois Scipio, I think everybody was just in awe of her and her contributions because she ended up teaching at Langston and all the things she was involved in. Now today, I work very closely with Bruce Fisher, her son, at the Historical Society, because we're always involved it probably has to do with the magazine, but we're always involved in different historical things, and we're both on the Freedom Center board now as a result of having put together a committee to pass the maps forward.
Okay.
So we can build,
Yeah.
restore the Freedom Center and build the Clara Luper Civil Rights Center is what we have in mind. As far as my, like I said, I was mostly in awe of Ada Lois Scipio, and my encounters with her were mostly from interviews, different events where I interviewed her and I interviewed her for a documentary that we did on Roscoe Dungy, because Roscoe Dungy was the person who actually put together the legal group with Marshall, with the Supreme Court judge, and the NAACP was very active, and that was when Mr. Roscoe Dungy was the leader of pulling those things together. So my interaction with Nancy Davis, like I said, I knew her being involved with Miss Luper, and but nothing really. I would say I probably had more interaction with Miss Luper. Yeah, but she was always there.
Yeah.
She was always there. Yeah.
So, can you talk to me a little bit, like, recount what it was like sitting at those lunch counters, being a part of that demonstration? Like, what was it like?
When we went, I would say today, if I had to describe Miss Luper, she was a strategist, and because she always made sure everything was covered. It wasn't until I became an adult that I realized and was talking to Miss Luper when she talked about, Joyce, we had a lot of angels that helped us that we'll never know all their names, because I wanted you guys to be safe. And those angels were a lot of businesses, a lot of people downtown that became, one of the angels that she said was the police chief. During that period of time, we would expect the police chief to be the last person to be supported, but Miss Luper had talked to him along with E. Melvin Porter and Miss Nancy Davis and some of the other folk that was working very closely with Miss Luper to make sure that they protected us. And so she said a lot of angels came forth that paid for our food, that paid for us to get out of jail. We never spent a night in jail. Miss Luper went to jail 26 times, but we never spent a night in jail because they would take us downtown and put us in jail, and then they would come and get us out. So we didn't have a record. And I never even thought about a record until we were at a speaking event, and some of the students said, "So you have a jail record?" And I said, no, and we never thought about it. But someone always got us out. And what people don't realize, we were excited about going to jail. You know, we were young and we had no fear because Miss Luper made sure that we were trained. When I say nonviolent, she trained us that if they spit on you, wipe it off. Turn the other cheek. Do not fight back. Do not create a problem. And you wanted always to do what Miss Luper wanted you to do. You wanted to please her because she always took care of us. So we weren't afraid going in. We were just excited about the fact that we were going to make a difference. And so, like I said, it was Merlin who made the suggestion of going downtown. And so Ms. Luper took those 13 kids downtown, and then I got involved right after that, but I was already a part of the youth group and her class. And it was, it's just interesting that we never had a sense of fear at all.
How old were you?
13.
And you weren't afraid at all?
No, I mean, we didn't see it as, we saw it as an event that we were going to make a difference because Ms. Luper said we're going to make changes. She had taken a group of kids to Washington. I didn't get a chance to go on the bus to Washington, and she took them the southern route going and the northern route going and the southern route coming back. And the northern route opened their eyes to the fact that they could eat in restaurants and stay at places that they couldn't here in Oklahoma. And so coming back was when they sat down and started talking about why can't we have those same things? You know, and I didn't get a chance to go. My parents didn't want me to go. My mother was very fearful of me even getting involved when they were talking about people going downtown. My mother said no. And I cried and carried on, and everybody was going except me. And so my father said, you know that Miss Luper is going to watch out for those kids. So you let her go so she can be with her class and her classmates. And so Miss Luper, the first time that I got locked up, I can remember my mother telling Miss Luper, do not let my child ever get locked up. And when I got locked up, when I came home, mother said, I saw on television that they locked up some of those kids. You weren't in that room. And I said, no. But she had no idea how excited I was to be a part of the group that went to jail. So I could tell everybody I went to jail too. So yeah, that's right. And so that's why I say we weren't afraid, because anything that we did, we were proud of being a part of Miss Luper saying that we were going to make the difference. And then when it happened, what we didn't realize is when someone said, did you guys celebrate after the Civil Rights Bill was passed? No, we didn't, because we kept doing things. Because Ms. Luper didn't stop there. That's why I said she was involved and had the sanitation workers started meeting at the Freedom Center. And because a lot of them got fired because they started doing the strike. So no, that was just to please Miss Luper. We were definitely her little kids. So
you talked about being a part of the youth council. Can you talk about like what the youth council meant and for you guys as children?
It was definitely community. It was a place for us to get with all of our buddies and friends, everybody that was not just kids a part of her class, other kids that were part of the NAACP youth group. She was always teaching us about Black history, teaching us about things that we needed to know about the Constitution, teaching us about our rights. And so it was a place for us to raise funds. We did fish fries and everything that you could sell to raise money for the different activities that she was doing. So it was like going to the Y, you know, and all your friends were there. And so we had different activities, and she was always taking us places to show us different things and open up our minds. And so it was a great place to be a part of the youth council.
So you talked about she really honed in on nonviolence. They spit on you, wipe it off.
Yeah, she taught us, even if they pushed us, if they pulled our hair, and if they to just how to sit on the floor and not be pushed over, and for us not to get angry.
Why do you think there was such a push for the nonviolence?
I think that it was well, she believed in Martin Luther King's nonviolent strategy and wanted us to be safe, and felt that because as an NAACP leader, along with the different leaders here, they felt that the kids wouldn't be attacked like an adult, that it would start something awful if it was adults. And so she made sure that we were trained how not to be violent. And of course used the examples that Martin Luther King had established. And so it was important that I think that was the only reason we didn't have problems here in Oklahoma. Whereas you saw the dogs and the people being attacked in other places.
Yeah, so did it ever get hostile during the sit-ins, or?
The tone and the atmosphere there was no visible aggression in Oklahoma. Even though they did pour coffee on, some of the people did get pushed. Some of the people got spat on, all kinds of little things like that, but there was no fighting, there was no violence at all. And I think it was because adults attacking children is just something that you don't do. And so everybody, I think, realized.
Yeah. And just even to have the foresight to use students because of that very reason. It's just.
Yeah, that was Miss Luper. She was.
When you say strategist.
Yeah, she was a strategist. She definitely was.
And did you consider this experience educational?
Years later.
What made it educational?
Just the facts the fact that we were the largest and the longest, and we made an impact not just here in Oklahoma City but across the state, because she took the sit-in movement and the whole nonviolence protests into areas like Lawton, and they were in Tulsa and different places all over the state. Ms. Luper became connected to and became a teacher for us learning. And then I realized that it was educational because the civil rights movement here made a difference, not just in Oklahoma, but across the country. It was something that we had done that we never applauded ourselves for because we didn't realize the magnitude of what we did.
Mm-hmm.
But years later, yes.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah.
And leading up to the demonstration, what did the organization look like?
The organization, it was community people. They first start meeting at Ms. Luper's home, and then we start meeting down at Calvary. And so it was community people. She made sure that we had the attorneys were there, and that was, and nobody was getting paid for anything. You know, that's why I said people volunteered from all over, and that's when she told us when we were adults that there were so many angels that from different churches, Catholic churches, Protestant churches, all kinds of whites that became involved to offer their help and service because they felt that it was wrong. Mm-hmm. And then for cats to open up all of their stores across the country in about 3 days. And then the others, like I said, it took a while for the other stores here, restaurants and food places, for us to be able to. But I think for Ms. Luper, I think having the meeting with Ms. Johnny Brown made a big difference too. She had been trying to get to Miss Brown. Miss Brown, after her husband had passed away, was running the big store downtown. That was the big department store. And that, I think, triggered more places opening up. Yeah, yeah.
Johnny Brown was a department store?
Yeah, it was a big department store downtown.
Wow. And then, how does such an experience, looking back, influence your life? Even now, and leaving high school and going to college, like, does that experience like influence your life?
Yes, and I once again, I'd have to say that I never really thought about the impact of our lives until we started coming together to try to recognize the fact that it was a big deal that we did make a difference with the sit-in movement, and it impacted my life because I realized why I have a love for Black history, respect for our culture, why it's important that Black history is American history, and people realize that it's not a separate thing. We're a part of America, and to correct our history. If we don't know our history, we can't correct it. If someone else tells your story, it's unfortunately not your story, and so I realized the impact she had on me for loving Black history and, like I said, the respect for my culture, because I've always wanted to do something to recognize and applaud people that are doing things in our community that never get the applause. Mm-hmm. Or if they do, it's kind of pushed aside. So when I retired, I thought I was going to sit back like everybody else, but I had for years wanted to start a magazine. And so I started a magazine called Shades of Oklahoma that comes out quarterly. And my ultimate goal is to make it a statewide magazine, and my ultimate goal is to make it come out at least 6 times a year, and that's what I'm pushing toward. And just to utilize the history to put a spotlight on people. It's unfortunate that we wait until someone passes away and then say, oh, I didn't realize that they did that. and when I say that there's so much forgotten history, and our history has not been documented properly and has not been put out there, and people have been ill-informed. Even today, when we talk to different groups about the sit-in movement, there are people that say, first, I didn't know that there was a sit-in movement, or Clara Luper, you know, and Miss Luper made an impact all over the country, you know. In fact, all over the world, because when the sit-ins were happening here in Oklahoma, then the newspapers all over the world picked up the story. And so that's why I said that the impact was all over the world. So yes, she influenced what I ultimately became. I was that kid that had my head down in class, that sit in the corner, that was too bashful to speak up. And Miss Luper said, always talk like you know what you're talking about and walk like you know where you're going. And when I ended up in television, because the gentleman, my boss here at OIC, suggested that I talk to one of the television stations, because at the time we were training people for different jobs, you know, to upgrade their skills, because they were mostly people that had never finished school, had either been incarcerated, or people coming out of the service, or just too poor to go to school and learn a trade. And so my boss, Nan, said, call one of those television stations and see if we can get someone to train them in some kind of production work, something that they don't have to have a college degree for, but they can be trained to do, so we can have another source for placing people in for job placement. And so I asked Nan, what station should I call? And she said, what's your favorite television station? And I said, the one that has Ho-Ho the Clown and Pokey the Puppet. And that was on Channel 5. And so she said, well, call them. And so that's why I said Miss Luper had the influence on making me not afraid to speak up. And so I got on the phone and I called the station and talked to the vice president, who ultimately became my boss and my mentor. And I asked for the person that handled the jobs, or handle creation of jobs, because we were interested in getting someone to train people. And I talked to John Harrison, and he said, I'd be happy to come out to OIC and see what we can offer. And he started the production where they would do on-job training for people working in production. So we got quite a few people hired, even training them to be good videographers. So that's how Channel 5 and I came together, because one day after he had been doing that for a little over a year, maybe about not quite 2 years, he called me one day and he said, I'd like to talk to you about coming to work for me. And I said, I have a job. And so he said, I think you would like working at the television station. And I thought, I said, well, you have to have a college degree, and I didn't finish college. I dropped out. And he said, are you looking for an excuse not to come to me? Because when he asked me things like, well, you do type. And I said, well, not real fast. And he said, one of the things you'd be doing some typing, some tour guiding, you'd be a receptionist, and you would have to make coffee for our guests. And I said, oh, I don't make coffee. And he said, I've never interviewed anybody that didn't want the job so much that they found all kinds of excuses. He said, but would love for you to come out and talk to me about coming to work for me. And I called my boss and I told her, I said, this guy is trying to get me to come to work for him. And she said, I know because I told him to.
Oh.
And I thought, oh. And so it was Nan that pushed me into that. She said, I think you have so much more to offer. And he asked me about you coming to work for him. And I told him you would do wonderfully. And I said, what if I don't like those people? And so she said, if you don't like those people, I'll give you a job back. I said, okay. And so after the hair thing, I thought, maybe I should go back to OIC. But John said, that'll be the end of that. You won't ever hear that again. And so I didn't.
And then now you became the first.
Yeah, the first African-American woman, because the four had hired a photographer, Oliver Murray, at Channel 4. But I was the first female on the air, and eventually became a part-time anchor. And that was an experience because I remember us being sent to a story in Idabel, Oklahoma. They had hung a black guy. And they sent to me a black crew. And I was so upset about what was done, you know. But in retrospect, they did the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because even now, if you look at News Channel 4, News Channel 9, News Channel 5, News Channel 5 is the only one with a black anchor. And my mom has called News Channel 4 so many times about their lack of black anchors.
Yes,
and
yes.
She's like, so it's just so interesting that the dynamic is still very much the same.
But Channel, I will have to say that Channel 4 did do something that the other stations didn't do, and what they did is they put some blacks in management. And 5 has always had more diversity and probably more visibility. But 4 did put people in management before any of the others.
Yeah. Okay, I think lastly is just talking about the effectiveness of Brown. You talked about the fact that we didn't properly integrate, but we desegregated. Can you kind of elaborate on what you feel is the difference between like not properly integrating but desegregating? Like how are you defining the difference between the two?
Well, the difference to me would have been to integrate. I think that we wouldn't have had to, the jobs would have opened up if we fully integrated. The impact of our economic status in our communities would have flourished instead of dying out. The respect for our culture was never infiltrated into the community as a whole. When now there, for instance, Oklahoma is known as the Sooner Boomer. Okay. Blacks were here and had all black towns way before statehood. Statehood was in 1907. Blacks had already settled because they came in as slaves to the Native Americans here, and some were freedmen and had moved in to the territory and established over 50 towns in Oklahoma. And then to say that Oklahoma was started by the Sooner Boomer, that's not correct history. Things would have I think, to me, an integration would have been to take all of those pluses in the Black culture and add them to the pluses in the white community, and things would have flourished, but things didn't. It took many, many years for us to even get to this point, and even in this day and time, we still have one in some places, in positions, in jobs, and for many, many years, I was the only one. I was the only one when I quit television and got into communications because my minor was in public relations. But when I went to work for the Oklahoma Department of Correction, I was only one of two in the entire nation, Black communications director, because they had never had the person that's the public information officer or the spokesperson for agency like corrections, which is, a criminal justice agency, an agency with that much coverage and information. They had never had a Black in that position. So in a lot of positions that I've been in, I've been the one, the only. And you would think with integration and with the Civil Rights Bill having been passed in '64, that you wouldn't still have, but we still have one. And I think it wouldn't have been difficult for the busing. The busing, I guess, was necessary. Now I realize it was necessary to bring folk together, but it created a lot of tension, And I'm not saying that doing integration another way would have caused. I think it would have caused less tension, if people had been more open and more observant of the things that weren't done. And still, in some cases, racism is now, I think we're going backwards today. I think we're going backwards with the civil rights rules and laws are being wiped out, being reimagined because of so much racism that we have. But you can't do anything about the color of your skin. But you can do something about your mind, realizing that you are as good as anyone, and you have the same rights, and you are an American. You're not an immigrant, because we weren't brought to America as immigrants. We were brought here as property. Being slaves, and how much the Black culture has influenced and contributed to American history has still not been recognized properly. And so I'm glad to know that you're recognizing the ladies that have made major contributions to our a complete culture and movement. Ada Lois Scipio, the legal field, and Clara Luper in the civil rights, and Nancy Davis in the civil rights, and Thelma Parks in education and civil rights, and now of course Ms. Luper and all of those ladies in the formal education that they made. They opened doors where in a lot of cases there were no doors.
The way I see it, they opened doors for me, like learning about Black women, and what you said earlier about history, like these people seemed accessible to you, like you knew them. It's like we learn about Angela Davis and Bell Hooks and Toni Morrison, and they seem so far-fetched.
Right.
But for me, being a Black woman in Oklahoma, in education,
these women
are
right in our community.
Yes. And so that for me was like empowering. Like, this is close. Like if I want to be part of this, then I can do it. And these are the women that I can
Yeah.
model after.
And that's the influence that they had on people of my age. The empowerment, just to know that you can do. Well, Miss Luper said you can do anything and be anything you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And when I was growing up, I remember our counselors saying that, do you want to be a teacher? You want to go to college and be a teacher? That was all her range, or a nurse's aide, not a nurse,
Right.
a nurse's aide, not a doctor,
Right.
not a lawyer, but a secretary, or, and now you can be.
Anything you want.
Yeah, and Miss Luper said that many years ago. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to add? This was amazing.
Well, no, I just hope I offered you some insight into what it was like. And it still has an influence on you, even when you get older. The fact that you were, like I said, we didn't realize the impact we had. And here I am at this age, realizing that we did have quite an impact on not just Oklahoma City, but the world, in making a difference and moving forward in our civil rights, being recognized.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today.